Everything you think you know about Vikings is wrong. They were not the mindless berserkers Hollywood made them. They were not the filthy savages that medieval monks described. And they were definitely not the horned helmet-wearing caricatures that ended up on every Halloween costume. The real Vikings were something far more interesting. And their approach to physical training was, in some ways, more sophisticated than Sparta's. Here is what the evidence actually shows. The word Viking is not a race or a people. It is a job description. To go Viking meant to go raiding. The Norse people who did this were farmers, traders, craftsmen, and explorers first. Warriors second. And that distinction matters enormously when you understand how they built their bodies. A Spartan trained to be a warrior and nothing else. A Norse farmer trained because the land demanded it. He rode. He felled trees. He hauled nets from freezing water. He built longships by hand. He carried livestock. He survived winters that would kill most modern humans within a week. This was not workout culture. This was work culture. And the physical results were extraordinary. Skeletal analysis of Viking-age Norse remains consistently shows muscle attachment points that indicate upper body development far beyond what most modern athletes achieve. The deltoids, the trapezius, the lats, the forearms. These were not gym muscles. These were functional pulling and rowing muscles built through decades of real work. Rowing a Viking longship was one of the most physically demanding activities a human body can perform. A full-sized longship required between 20 and 40 oarsmen rowing in synchrony, sometimes for hours without stopping. In open ocean. Against currents and wind. With no motor, no brake scheduled, and no option to stop if the sea decided to get rough. Modern rowers who attempt Viking-style open ocean rowing report that nothing in contemporary training fully prepares them for it. The duration, the instability, the cold, the weight of the oar, it produces a total body stimulus that no gym machine can replicate. But here is where the Viking approach diverges sharply from Sparta, and where it gets genuinely surprising. The Norse had a concept called holistic strength. Not a modern term they used, but a principle embedded in their culture. A man's worth was not measured by how much he could lift in isolation. It was measured by what he could do. Could he wrestle? Could he row? Could he climb a cliff? Could he ski? Could he throw an axe accurately while exhausted? Could he swim in freezing water? The Norse sagas, the epic stories that documented their culture, are full of references to these combined physical tests. The hero Egil Skallagrimsson was described as able to kill a man with a single punch, drink his enemies under the table, write complex poetry, and swim across a fjord in full armor. These were not considered separate skills. They were one unified measure of a man. Modern exercise science calls this general physical preparedness. The idea that the body should be capable across multiple domains simultaneously: strength, endurance, power, agility, cold tolerance. CrossFit built an entire industry around this concept in the 21st century. The Norse figured it out 1,000 years earlier. Their diet was equally pragmatic and surprisingly effective. Norse warriors ate primarily meat, fish, dairy, and grain. Dried fish, specifically Skyr, a thick-strained dairy product similar to yogurt, was a staple that provided dense protein in a form that survived long voyages without refrigeration. Skyr is now sold in health food stores worldwide as a high-protein superfood. It was Viking travel food. They also ate significant amounts of organ meat, liver, heart, kidney, foods that modern fitness culture is now rediscovering after decades of ignoring them. Organ meats contain nutrient concentrations that muscle meat simply cannot match, vitamins, minerals, and compounds like CoQ10 that directly support energy production at the cellular level. And they fasted. Not by design, but by necessity. Long sea voyages meant periods of minimal food followed by periods of feast when they made land. This cycling of restriction and abundance mirrors the intermittent fasting protocols that modern research consistently links to metabolic health, hormonal optimization, and longevity. The Norse also had a training practice that most people have never heard of: swimming as a martial skill. In Norse culture, the ability to swim, specifically, to swim long distances in cold water while potentially armored or carrying weapons, was considered a core warrior competency. The sagas reference swimming competitions regularly. Egil Skallagrimsson reportedly swam for an entire day to escape enemies. Beowulf begins with a famous swimming contest that lasted 5 days in open ocean. Cold water immersion in training has exploded in popularity over the last decade. Researchers like Andrew Huberman and Susanna Soberg have documented the neurological and metabolic effects of deliberate cold exposure. The Norse were doing this as a survival skill a millennium before anyone studied why it worked. But perhaps the most striking thing about Viking physical culture is this: it never separated the physical from the mental. The Norse concept of Hugr, loosely translated as spirit or mind force, held that a warrior's physical capacity was inseparable from his psychological state. A man who was afraid was also physically weaker. A man who was calm and purposeful was also physically stronger. This was not mythology to them. It was observed fact. Modern neuroscience has confirmed the mechanism. The nervous system regulates muscular output. Fear triggers the sympathetic nervous system in ways that can actually inhibit force production in trained contexts. Calm, focused mental states allow greater motor unit recruitment. The Norse warriors who cultivated Hugr through practice, ritual, and mental conditioning were, without knowing the neuroscience, training their nervous systems to allow higher physical output. The Berserkers, the Norse warriors famous for their trance-like battle fury, were the extreme expression of this principle. They used specific breathing techniques, ritual preparation, and possibly psychoactive substances to override the brain's normal governors on physical output. They were not myths. They were documented by multiple independent sources. And what they were doing maps onto what we now understand about adrenaline, cortisol, and the temporary removal of the nervous system's safety limiters. So what does all of this mean? The Vikings were not superhuman. They were the product of a lifestyle that produced extraordinary physical capacity as a